In the sweltering heat of a midsummer evening in 1996, Baltimore's Camden Yards hummed with anticipation. Comment where you're watching from today, as we take you back to one of baseball's most unforgettable moments of sportsmanship and dignity. The story begins not with a crack of the bat or the roar of the crowd, but with the quiet determination of a man who had already carved his name into baseball history. Cal Ripken Jr., known as the Iron Man of baseball, stood in the dugout, his eyes fixed on the field with the same intensity that had carried him through 2,216 consecutive games. But tonight would test more than just his endurance. It would challenge his character in ways that would shock everyone in attendance. The opposing team's pitcher, Michael Wilson, had been making waves in the league, not just for his fastball, but for his increasingly controversial comments about veteran players. A young hotshot with a blazing arm and an even hotter temper, Wilson had recently been quoted in the press questioning whether some veterans were hanging on too long, specifically calling out players who couldn't catch up to real heat anymore. The tension in the stadium was palpable as Wilson took the mound for his warm-up throws. The right-hander had been drafted by the Cleveland Indians and had quickly developed a reputation for his brash personality. His recent comments had drawn criticism from baseball purists, but Wilson seemed to thrive on the controversy, each critical article only fueling his defiant attitude. In the Baltimore dugout, Ripken's teammates, including veteran catcher Charles Thomas and first baseman Robert Manning, exchanged knowing glances. They had all read Wilson's comments in the morning papers, where he had specifically mentioned that certain record holders might be more concerned with streaks than winning. The implication was clear. It was a direct shot at Ripken's consecutive game streak. The first inning passed without incident, though Wilson's body language spoke volumes. Every time he completed an inning, he would stalk around the mound, his gestures increasingly demonstrative. In the second inning, he struck out two Orioles batters and made sure they knew about it, pointing to his fastball velocity reading on the scoreboard, 98 miles per hour. As the third inning approached, the summer air grew thicker with humidity and tension. The crowd of 47,000 fans, led by passionate supporters like season ticket holders James Foster and Sarah Phillips in the front row, could sense something brewing. They had come to see baseball, but they were about to witness something far more meaningful. Wilson's first pitch of the third inning sent Bradley Anderson, the Orioles' leadoff hitter, diving into the dirt. The ball had sailed dangerously close to Anderson's head, and the crowd erupted in boos. Rather than show any concern, Wilson smirked and adjusted his cap, a gesture that didn't go unnoticed by the Orioles' dugout. The next batter, Daniel Murphy, stepped up to the plate with caution. Wilson's reputation for pitching inside was well known, but tonight he seemed particularly aggressive. Murphy managed to work a walk, but not before another pitch sailed uncomfortably close to his hands. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for, Cal Ripken Jr.'s first at-bat against Wilson. As Ripken emerged from the dugout, the crowd rose to their feet, as they had done for every at-bat since he broke Lou Gehrig's consecutive game streak. But this time, there was an extra charge in the air. Wilson's first pitch was a statement, a 97 miles per hour fastball that rode high and tight, forcing Ripken to arch his back to avoid contact. The crowd's reaction was immediate and hostile, but Ripken remained stoic, his face a mask of concentration as he retook his stance in the batter's box. Before throwing his next pitch, Wilson made a show of walking around the mound, all while muttering just loud enough for his words to carry to home plate. Maybe if you spent less time counting games and more time in the cage, you could catch up to this, he taunted, though only those closest to the field could hear his words. The Orioles' dugout bristled with anger. Manager David Martinez started up the dugout steps, ready to protest Wilson's behavior, but Ripken subtly waved him off. The Iron Man had faced down countless pitchers over his career, and he wasn't about to let this young firebrand get under his skin. As Wilson wound up for his second pitch, the stadium fell into an eerie silence. The ball left his hand like a bullet, another fastball aimed precariously close to Ripken's body. But this time, something remarkable happened. Something that would be talked about in Baltimore baseball circles for years to come. The crowd held its collective breath as the confrontation between the young, brash pitcher and the dignified veteran was about to take an unexpected turn. What happened next would not only silence Wilson's taunts but would also remind everyone in attendance why Cal Ripken Jr. was considered one of baseball's greatest ambassadors. The next few moments would demonstrate that sometimes the most powerful response to provocative behavior isn't found in words or retaliation, but in the quiet dignity of a true professional. As Wilson prepared to deliver his next pitch, no one in Camden Yards could have predicted how this at-bat would end, or the lasting impact it would have on both players' legacies. Veteran fans like Michael Roberts and Jennifer Davis, who had watched Ripken's entire career from the bleachers, would later say they had never seen anything quite like what was about to unfold. The interaction between these two players, one a legend of the game, the other a talented but undisciplined young pitcher, was about to become more than just another at-bat in a long season. It was about to become a lesson in respect, professionalism, and the unwritten rules of baseball. As Wilson took his position on the rubber, the humid Baltimore air seemed to crackle with electricity. The stage was set for a moment that would transcend the sport itself, teaching everyone present a lesson about dignity in the face of disrespect and the true meaning of being a professional. As Wilson set himself for the third pitch of the at-bat, the tension in Camden Yards had reached a fever pitch. The stadium's longtime public address announcer, Thomas Walker, had seen countless confrontations in his 30 years behind the microphone, but something about this one felt different. There was a weight to the moment that transcended the usual player-versus-player drama. Wilson's third pitch came in high and tight once again, forcing Ripken to dance away from the plate. The ball missed him by inches, and the crowd erupted in anger. In the front row, season ticket holders William Parker and Michelle Henderson were on their feet, their voices joining the chorus of boos that rained down from every corner of the ballpark. The home plate umpire, Richard Martinez, stepped out from behind the plate and issued a warning to both benches. In the Orioles' dugout, hitting coach Michael Thompson gripped the railing so hard his knuckles turned white. He had been working with Ripken for years, studying opposing pitchers, analyzing their patterns, and developing strategies. But this wasn't about strategy anymore. This was about respect for the game itself. Wilson's smirk grew wider as he received the ball back from his catcher, Jason Collins. He made a show of examining the baseball, turning it over in his hands as if looking for imperfections, all while shooting sideways glances at Ripken. The young pitcher's confidence had crossed the line into arrogance, and everyone in the stadium could sense it. The Orioles bench was getting restless. Veterans like Robert Manning and Charles Thomas had seen enough. Manning, a respected first baseman known for his calm demeanor, was visibly agitated. Thomas, the team's catcher who had caught hundreds of Ripken's games, started putting on his gear, ready for anything that might happen. But Ripken remained unchanged. His stance was perfect, his concentration unwavering. He had faced down the game's greatest pitchers over his career, from Roger Clemens to Randy Johnson, and had never backed down. He wasn't about to start now, especially not against a pitcher who seemed more interested in making a name for himself through confrontation than through his craft. In the broadcast booth, veteran announcer Kevin Davis leaned into his microphone, his voice carrying the gravity of the moment to millions of listeners. "In all my years covering baseball," he said, "I've never seen someone try to rattle Cal Ripken quite like this. But if Wilson thinks he's going to get under the Iron Man's skin, he clearly doesn't know who he's dealing with." The next pitch was perhaps the most telling. Wilson, clearly frustrated by Ripken's composure, reached back and fired his hardest fastball of the night, 99 miles per hour according to the stadium radar gun. The pitch was straight as an arrow but sailed high, missing its target by a considerable margin. Wilson's emotions were getting the better of him, and his control was suffering as a result. In the stands, longtime Orioles fans like Jennifer Wilson and Michael Stewart exchanged knowing looks. They had seen this before, young players trying to make their mark by challenging established stars. But there was something different about this confrontation, something that went beyond the usual competitive fire of baseball. The count now stood at 3-0, and conventional baseball wisdom suggested that Ripken would take the next pitch. Wilson, knowing this, decided to try something different. He stepped off the mound and began walking around, taking his time, trying to ice Ripken. The umpire, Martinez, called out for Wilson to play ball, but the pitcher seemed determined to drag out the moment. That's when something unexpected happened. Ripken stepped out of the batter's box and calmly walked over to pick up the rosin bag near home plate. He didn't show any signs of frustration or anger. He simply went about his routine as if this was any other at-bat in any other game. The contrast between Wilson's theatrical display and Ripken's professional demeanor couldn't have been more stark. In the opposing dugout, Wilson's own teammates were starting to look uncomfortable. Veterans like Christopher Harris and Daniel Thompson had been in the league long enough to know that their young pitcher was crossing lines that shouldn't be crossed. The team's pitching coach, Robert Anderson, was already on the phone to the bullpen, sensing that this situation might not end well for his young starter. The tension in the stadium had reached a critical mass. The humid Baltimore air seemed to crackle with electricity as Wilson finally returned to the mound. The crowd noise had transformed from angry boos to a low, expectant rumble. Everyone in attendance knew they were witnessing something special, even if they weren't quite sure what that something was yet. Wilson's next pitch would prove to be the turning point. Another fastball, this one clearly intended to back Ripken off the plate once again. But this time, something remarkable happened. As the ball approached, Ripken didn't flinch. He didn't dive away. Instead, with the practiced precision of a man who had played more consecutive games than anyone in baseball history, he turned on the pitch. The crack of the bat echoed through Camden Yards like a thunderclap. The ball jumped off Ripken's bat with such force that Wilson didn't even turn to watch it fly. The entire stadium held its breath as the baseball soared through the humid Baltimore night, climbing higher and higher until it disappeared into the left field bleachers. The response from the crowd was deafening. Season ticket holders James Morris and Sarah Thompson, who had been watching Ripken for decades, later said they had never heard Camden Yards louder. The home run wasn't just a response to Wilson's antics, it was a statement about professionalism, about dignity, about the right way to play the game. As Ripken rounded the bases, he maintained the same stoic expression he had worn throughout the entire confrontation. There was no celebration, no demonstration, no showing up the young pitcher. He simply circled the bases as he had done hundreds of times before, touching each bag with the same methodical precision that had characterized his entire career. When he crossed home plate, he was met by his teammates, including veterans David Martinez and Michael Lewis, who had seen countless examples of Ripken's professionalism over the years. But even they were impressed by how their teammate had handled this situation. The home run wasn't just a response to Wilson's provocations, it was a lesson in how to conduct oneself on baseball's biggest stage. In the opposing dugout, Wilson stood at the railing, his previous bravado completely deflated. His teammates, particularly veterans like Thomas Anderson and William Clark, made a point of avoiding eye contact with him. They knew that their young pitcher had just learned a valuable lesson about respect and professionalism, though whether he would take that lesson to heart remained to be seen. The aftermath of the home run was just as telling as the moment itself. As Ripken took his seat in the dugout, he was immediately surrounded by his teammates. Young players like Bradley Jones and Michael Stevens listened intently as Ripken quietly explained his approach to the at-bat. There were no boasts, no celebrations, just a master craftsman sharing his wisdom with the next generation. In the stands, fans like Jennifer Parker and Robert Wilson were still on their feet, their applause continuing long after Ripken had returned to the dugout. They understood that they had just witnessed something special, not just a home run, but a moment that encapsulated everything that made baseball great. The stadium's energy had transformed completely. The earlier tension and anger had given way to a sense of satisfaction, even appreciation. Even some of Wilson's own teammates could be seen nodding in acknowledgement of what they had just witnessed. This wasn't just about one at-bat or one home run, it was about the game itself, about respect, about doing things the right way. As the next batter, Daniel Murphy, stepped to the plate, the moment's significance continued to reverberate through Camden Yards. Veteran observers like Michael Roberts and Jennifer Davis, who had seen thousands of baseball games between them, knew they had just witnessed something that would be talked about for years to come. In the press box, journalists like Thomas Walker and Sarah Phillips were already crafting the headlines that would appear in the next day's papers. This wasn't just another game story, it was a lesson in professionalism, in dignity, in responding to provocation with excellence rather than anger. The impact of this moment would extend far beyond this single game. Young players throughout both dugouts, including prospects like Jason Thompson and Michael Stewart, had just received a masterclass in how to conduct themselves on a baseball field. The lesson wasn't delivered through words or lectures, but through actions, through the quiet dignity of a true professional responding to disrespect with excellence. The aftermath of Ripken's home run reverberated through Camden Yards like aftershocks from an earthquake. In the top of the next inning, as the teams changed sides, the stadium was still buzzing with electricity. Veteran security guard Thomas Mitchell, who had worked at Camden Yards since its opening, would later say he had never felt such a unique atmosphere in the ballpark, not anger, not celebration, but something deeper, more profound. Wilson remained in the game, but he was clearly rattled. His next few pitches to Orioles outfielder Michael Stevens sailed high and wide, missing their targets by considerable margins. In the visiting team's dugout, pitching coach Robert Anderson was already on the phone to the bullpen, where relievers James Harrison and David Thompson were hurriedly warming up. The visiting team's manager, veteran skipper William Howard, knew he had a delicate situation on his hands. He had seen countless confrontations during his 30 years in baseball, but this one was different. His young pitcher hadn't just challenged a respected veteran. He had received a lesson in professionalism that would either make or break his career. In the Orioles' dugout, the atmosphere was surprisingly subdued. There were no excessive celebrations, no taunting of the opposing pitcher. Instead, younger players like Bradley Parker and Jason Martinez clustered around Ripken, absorbing the wisdom he quietly shared about approaching such situations with dignity and focus. The team's hitting coach, Michael Thompson, later recalled overhearing Ripken's words to rookie infielder Christopher Davis. "It's not about proving someone wrong," Ripken had said. "It's about proving yourself right." That simple statement would become one of the most quoted pieces of advice in the Orioles clubhouse for years to come. As the game continued, the impact of the moment began to spread beyond the field. In the press box, veteran baseball writer Sarah Anderson was already crafting what would become a landmark column about sportsmanship and professionalism. Beside her, radio announcer Robert Wilson was describing the scene to listeners across the country, his voice carrying the weight of witnessing something truly special. The fans in attendance seemed to understand the significance of what they had just seen. Season ticket holders like Jennifer Thomas and Michael Foster were already pulling out their phones, calling friends and family to share what they had witnessed. This wasn't just another home run in a long season, it was a moment that encapsulated everything that made baseball great. In the opposing dugout, the mood was markedly different. Wilson's teammates, particularly veterans like Thomas Clark and William Peters, maintained a noticeable distance from their young pitcher. They understood that sometimes the most important lessons in baseball come through humbling experiences. The team's veteran catcher, Jason Collins, took it upon himself to approach Wilson between innings. Collins, known throughout the league for his mentorship of young players, spoke quietly but firmly to the young pitcher. "Watch how Ripken carries himself," he advised. "That's not just talent, that's character." As the middle innings progressed, the story began to spread beyond the confines of Camden Yards. Social media was lighting up with accounts of what had happened, though as veteran reporter David Martinez noted, no tweet or post could fully capture the dignity and power of the moment. In the stadium's luxury boxes, where baseball executives and former players often gathered, the conversation centered not just on Ripken's home run, but on what it represented. Former pitcher Michael Roberts, who had faced Ripken numerous times during his own career, explained to those around him why this moment was so significant. "That's not just about baseball, that's about life." The impact on the younger players was particularly noteworthy. Orioles rookie outfielder James Stevens, who had been called up just 2 weeks earlier, later said that watching Ripken's response to Wilson's provocations taught him more about being a professional than any conversation or coaching session ever could. In the visitors' clubhouse, the team's veteran leadership, including players like Robert Manning and Charles Thompson, began preparing for how they would handle the aftermath. They knew that how Wilson responded to this moment would be crucial for his development not just as a pitcher, but as a professional. The game's broadcasters, led by veteran announcer Kevin Davis, continued to provide context for what the crowd had witnessed. Davis, who had called thousands of baseball games over his career, compared Ripken's response to similar moments in baseball history, highlighting how rare it was to see such a perfect combination of skill and dignity. As the later innings approached, the atmosphere in Camden Yards remained charged with significance. Fans like Michael Stewart and Jennifer Wilson, who had attended hundreds of games over the years, found themselves discussing not just the home run, but the larger lessons about respect and professionalism that it represented. In the Orioles' dugout, manager David Martinez noticed something interesting. His players, particularly the younger ones, were carrying themselves differently. There was a newfound awareness of what it meant to be a professional, exemplified by the way rookie infielder Thomas Anderson carefully arranged his equipment between innings, a small but telling detail. The visiting team's coaching staff, led by bench coach William Clark, used the moment as a teaching opportunity. Between innings, they gathered their younger players, including promising prospects like Michael Lewis and Jason Thompson, to discuss what they had witnessed. The lesson wasn't about baseball mechanics or strategy, it was about character. Even the umpiring crew, led by veteran Richard Martinez, recognized the significance of what had transpired. Between innings, Martinez could be seen speaking quietly with his crew, noting how Ripken's response had actually helped defuse what could have become a volatile situation. In the press box, journalists like Thomas Walker and Sarah Phillips were already reaching out to their contacts throughout baseball, gathering reactions from players and coaches around the league. The consensus was clear: this wasn't just another highlight reel moment, but a testament to the importance of carrying oneself with dignity under pressure. The stadium's longtime public address announcer, Michael Roberts, found himself choosing his words carefully when Ripken came to bat again later in the game. There was no need for extra emphasis or dramatic flourishes. The moment spoke for itself, just as Ripken's response to Wilson had spoken volumes about his character. As the game moved into its later stages, the impact continued to ripple through both teams. In the visitors' bullpen, veteran relievers like David Thompson and James Harrison discussed how they would approach Wilson in the coming days. They understood that their young teammate needed guidance, not criticism, to learn from this experience. The Orioles' veteran players, including Robert Manning and Charles Thomas, made sure to share their perspectives with the team's younger members. They explained how Ripken's response demonstrated that the most powerful statements often come not through words, but through actions. In the stands, fans like Jennifer Parker and William Wilson found themselves explaining to their children not just what had happened, but why it mattered. This wasn't just about baseball, it was about handling adversity with grace, about responding to disrespect with excellence rather than anger. The stadium's operations staff, led by longtime employee Thomas Mitchell, noticed that even the crowd's behavior had shifted. There was a different kind of energy in the ballpark. Not the usual mix of cheers and jeers, but a shared appreciation for having witnessed something truly special. As the game entered its final innings, both dugouts seemed more focused, more professional. Young players like Bradley Jones and Michael Stevens paid extra attention to how they carried themselves on the field, understanding that every action, every gesture, communicated something about their character. The impact extended to the coaching staffs as well. The Orioles' hitting coach, Michael Thompson, found himself fielding questions from his players not just about batting mechanics, but about maintaining composure under pressure. The visiting team's pitching coach, Robert Anderson, used the moment to discuss the importance of emotional control on the mound. Even the stadium vendors, including longtime employees like Sarah Henderson and James Foster, noticed the different atmosphere in the ballpark. The usual between-innings chatter among fans focused not on statistics or standings, but on the larger lessons about sportsmanship and dignity that had been displayed. The media coverage was already taking shape. Veteran reporters like David Martinez and Jennifer Davis were crafting stories that went beyond the box score, examining how this moment exemplified the best traditions of baseball. Photographers like Michael Roberts and Thomas Walker had captured images that would tell the story for years to come. As the game approached its conclusion, both teams seemed to understand that they had been part of something special. Veterans like William Clark and Robert Manning made sure their younger teammates appreciated the significance of what they had witnessed. This wasn't just another game in a long season, it was a moment that defined what baseball, at its best, could be. The impact would continue long after the final out. In the days and weeks that followed, players like Jason Thompson and Michael Stewart would reference this game when mentoring younger teammates. Coaches like David Anderson and William Howard would use it as an example of how to handle difficult situations with professionalism. The lesson wasn't just about baseball, it was about character, about dignity, about responding to challenges in a way that elevated not just oneself, but the entire game. As the stadium lights illuminated the Baltimore night, everyone present understood that they had witnessed something that transcended sports, a moment of pure professionalism that would be remembered and discussed for years to come. Years later, the events of that summer night at Camden Yards would be remembered not just as a remarkable baseball moment, but as a testament to the power of professionalism and dignity in sports. The impact of Cal Ripken Jr.'s response to Michael Wilson's provocations would echo through baseball in ways that nobody could have predicted that evening. Wilson's career took an unexpected turn following that night. The young pitcher, humbled by the experience, underwent a transformation that veteran teammates like Thomas Clark and William Peters noticed immediately. In the clubhouse the next day, Wilson approached his manager, William Howard, and asked for guidance on how to become a better professional. The conversation that followed would become part of baseball lore. Howard, drawing from his 3 decades of baseball experience, spent over an hour with Wilson, breaking down not just the previous night's events, but the broader lessons about respect and dignity in the game. Veteran pitcher Robert Manning, who overheard the discussion, would later describe it as the moment a talented thrower became a real pitcher. In the Orioles organization, the impact was equally profound. Young players like Bradley Parker and Jason Martinez found themselves approaching the game differently. The team's hitting coach, Michael Thompson, incorporated the incident into his teaching, using it as an example of how mental discipline and professional comportment could translate into success at the plate. The media coverage, led by veteran writers like Sarah Anderson and Thomas Walker, went far beyond the usual game reports. Their articles explored the deeper meanings of what had transpired, examining how Ripken's response exemplified the best traditions of baseball. The story resonated far beyond sports pages, appearing in business journals and leadership magazines as an example of grace under pressure. Former players like David Martinez and Jennifer Davis, now working as broadcasters, would often reference that night when discussing the importance of maintaining composure in crucial moments. The footage of Ripken's home run and measured response became a staple of baseball instructional videos, shown to minor league players as an example of professional excellence. In the years that followed, both Wilson and Ripken would cross paths again, but under very different circumstances. At an old-timers game 5 years later, Wilson approached Ripken during batting practice. Witnesses like Michael Roberts and James Foster observed as the two men spoke quietly for several minutes. What was said remained private, but those present noted the mutual respect evident in their interaction. The incident became a touchstone for discussions about baseball's unwritten rules and the importance of respecting the game. Veteran managers like Christopher Harris and Robert Anderson would reference it when mentoring young players, using it to illustrate how responding to provocations with excellence rather than anger could change not just a game, but a career. In baseball academies and training camps across the country, coaches like Michael Stevens and Thomas Anderson incorporated the story into their instruction. They used it to demonstrate that true strength in baseball isn't just about physical ability, but about maintaining composure and dignity under pressure. The fans who witnessed the event firsthand, like season ticket holders Jennifer Thomas and William Wilson, would pass the story down to younger generations of baseball enthusiasts. Their accounts would emphasize not just the dramatic home run, but the larger lesson about carrying oneself with grace in challenging situations. The stadium staff at Camden Yards, including longtime employees like Sarah Henderson and James Foster, would often share their memories of that night with visitors. They described not just the tension and drama, but the unique atmosphere that settled over the ballpark after Ripken's response, a combination of awe and appreciation for witnessing something truly special. In baseball clubhouses around the league, the incident became a reference point for discussions about professionalism. Veterans like Charles Thompson and Robert Manning would share the story with rookies, using it to illustrate the difference between reacting emotionally and responding professionally to challenges. The impact extended beyond baseball. Business schools, led by professors like Michael Stewart and Jennifer Parker, began using the incident as a case study in leadership and professional conduct. They analyzed how Ripken's response demonstrated the power of maintaining composure and letting excellence speak for itself. Youth baseball coaches like Jason Thompson and David Clark found the story particularly valuable in teaching young players about sportsmanship. They used it to show that the strongest response to provocation isn't always the most obvious or emotional one, but rather the one that demonstrates true professionalism. The incident also influenced how baseball organizations approached player development. Teams began placing greater emphasis on mental preparation and professional conduct, with veteran coaches like William Howard and Thomas Mitchell incorporating these lessons into their training programs. In the broadcast booth, announcers like Kevin Davis and Robert Wilson would often reference that night when discussing the evolution of baseball's culture. They noted how the incident had helped reinforce the importance of respecting both the game and its history. The security staff at Camden Yards, led by veteran guard Thomas Mitchell, would point out how the crowd's response that night demonstrated baseball's unique ability to appreciate moments of genuine character. The fans hadn't just cheered a home run, they had recognized and celebrated a moment of true professionalism. Minor league instructors like Bradley Jones and Michael Stevens began incorporating the story into their teaching curriculum. They used it to help young players understand that success in baseball isn't just about physical skills, but about developing the character and composure needed to handle challenging situations. The incident's impact on baseball journalism was equally significant. Writers like David Martinez and Jennifer Davis found themselves increasingly focused on the human elements of the game, exploring how moments of character and dignity could resonate far beyond the final score. In the years following the incident, both teams' organizations would undergo subtle but important changes. The Orioles, under the leadership of manager David Martinez, became known for their emphasis on professional conduct and respectful competition. The visiting team, influenced by veterans like Thomas Clark and William Peters, developed a reputation for mentoring young players in the game's traditions. The umpiring crew from that night, led by Richard Martinez, would often share their perspective on how Ripken's response had actually made their job easier. They noted how his professional conduct had helped prevent the situation from escalating into something that could have marred the game. Baseball historians like Michael Roberts and Sarah Phillips began including the incident in their accounts of the game's evolution. They saw it as a pivotal moment that helped reinforce baseball's traditional values in an era of increasing showmanship and confrontation. The stadium's public address announcer, Thomas Walker, would sometimes pause briefly before announcing Ripken's name in subsequent games, allowing the crowd a moment to remember and appreciate what they had witnessed that night. It became a subtle but meaningful tradition at Camden Yards. Players who were in the minor leagues at the time, like Jason Martinez and Bradley Parker, would later describe how news of the incident had spread through the baseball community. They recalled how their coaches had used it as a teaching moment about the importance of maintaining composure and dignity on the field. The incident also influenced how baseball organizations approached conflict resolution. Veterans like Robert Manning and Charles Thomas would often reference it when mentoring younger players about handling on-field confrontations professionally. In the press box, journalists like Thomas Walker and Sarah Phillips found themselves increasingly drawn to stories about character and professionalism in baseball. They recognized that fans were hungry for examples of players who represented the best traditions of the game. The impact on baseball instruction was particularly notable. Coaches at all levels, from Little League to the majors, began incorporating lessons about professional conduct and responding to provocation with excellence rather than anger. The incident became a cornerstone of these teachings. Even the stadium vendors, like longtime employees James Foster and Sarah Henderson, noticed a change in how fans discussed the game. There was a greater appreciation for moments of dignity and professionalism, a recognition that baseball at its best was about more than just winning and losing. As the years passed, the story became part of baseball's rich tapestry of tales that illustrated the game's deeper meanings. It wasn't just about a home run or a confrontation, it was about how one player's professional response to provocation had helped reinforce baseball's most important traditions. The legacy of that night continues to influence baseball culture today. Whether in major league stadiums or small-town ballparks, coaches and players still reference the incident when discussing the importance of maintaining dignity and professionalism in challenging situations. It stands as a reminder that in baseball, as in life, how we respond to provocation often says more about our character than the provocation itself. Let us know in the comments if you've ever witnessed a moment of true professionalism in sports that left a lasting impression on you. Share your stories about times when dignity and class prevailed over confrontation and anger. Because sometimes, the most powerful statements we can make are the ones we make through our actions rather than our words.